Ethan adjusted the strap of his apron and leaned over the simmering pot of tomato sauce, inhaling the blend of roasted garlic, basil, and onions. His bistro was small, tucked into a quiet street corner, but it had heart. Every brick and every shelf of spices carried his story, the story of a man who had lost much, but still believed in creating warmth for others. On a quiet afternoon, with sunlight spilling through the large front windows, the restaurant felt like a sanctuary. The walls were decorated with framed chalkboards listing daily specials, little flower pots on the tables, and shelves lined with cookbooks and jars of spices. His daughter, Lily, sat at a corner table with crayons and a half-finished drawing of a sun. She hummed a made-up tune, her tiny legs swinging under the chair, her presence filling the space with a joy that only a child could bring. For Ethan, being both chef and single father meant days were long and nights even longer, but he had made peace with it. His love for cooking was rivaled only by his love for Lily. To him, food was more than sustenance, it was memory, comfort, and love on a plate. The quiet rhythm of the afternoon was suddenly broken when the doorbell chimed, and a woman stepped in. She didn't belong to the world of cozy neighborhood diners. Everything about her spoke of wealth and authority, the cut of her tailored navy suit, the gleam of her heels, the way her hair was tied back in a perfect chignon. She was the kind of woman used to commanding boardrooms, not small restaurants. But the image of control was undone by the baby in her arms. The little girl was red-faced and wailing, her cries filling the space with sharp desperation. The woman, Claire Donovan, though Ethan didn't know her name yet, shifted the baby from one arm to the other, whispering soothing words, but nothing worked. Her usually steady composure cracked, and exhaustion clung to her like a shadow. Ethan glanced up from the counter, his heart tightening. He knew that sound too well, the frantic, helpless cry of an infant who needed more than just rocking. He wiped his hands on his apron and walked toward her. "Mind if I try something?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Claire looked up, startled. For a moment, suspicion flickered in her eyes. She wasn't used to strangers offering help, and certainly not in her world, where trust was currency. But there was something about Ethan's presence, calm, warm, genuine, that made her pause. Her baby's cries had grown sharper, her tiny fists waving in frustration. Reluctantly, she nodded. Ethan moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had done this countless times before. He grabbed a small bowl, quickly mashing freshly roasted sweet potatoes with a pat of butter and a dash of cinnamon. The aroma was gentle and comforting, the kind of smell that made a person think of home. He carried the dish over and offered it to Claire. "May I?" he asked, meeting her tired eyes. Her hesitation melted as she handed the baby over, almost without realizing it. Ethan cradled the infant against his arm, his hands steady, his movements tender. He blew gently on the spoon before bringing it to her lips. The baby fussed for a second, then opened her mouth, tasting the sweet, warm mash. The cries softened. Another spoonful, and the little one's hiccuping sobs faded into silence. She blinked up at Ethan with wide, trusting eyes, her tiny hand curling around his finger as if she had found something safe. A few minutes later, she sighed and nestled against his chest, content and calm. Claire stood frozen, her lips parted, her breath uneven. She had tried everything for weeks, doctors, nannies, expensive formulas, lullabies, but nothing had worked. And now, this stranger, this man in a simple apron, had soothed her daughter with nothing but food and patience. Her chest tightened, her throat prickling with a feeling she couldn't name. Watching him hold her baby so naturally, as though he had known her all along, shook something inside her. She realized how long it had been since she had seen her daughter so peaceful. In that quiet moment, amid the faint hum of the city outside and the golden light of the bistro, Claire Donovan, billionaire, CEO, untouchable, felt something unfamiliar. Vulnerability, and perhaps, the beginning of trust. Claire told herself it was coincidence. That the next day, she had simply been in the neighborhood again, and stopping by Ethan's bistro was convenient. But deep down, she knew it wasn't true. Something about yesterday had lingered in her mind, the way her daughter had finally fallen asleep in peace, the way Ethan's quiet presence had felt like an anchor. When she stepped through the door, the familiar aroma of garlic and herbs greeted her. Her baby stirred but didn't cry this time, as if she too remembered the comfort she had found here. Claire ordered something simple, roast chicken with vegetables, and sat at the same table as before, watching Ethan move behind the counter. His movements were precise but not rushed, efficient yet unhurried, as though every detail mattered. He wasn't cooking for customers, he was cooking for people. Over the following week, she returned again and again. Sometimes for a meal, sometimes just for coffee. Always with her baby, who seemed calmer in this space than anywhere else. Claire noticed things she hadn't before. The way Ethan crouched down to tie Lily's shoelaces while she chattered endlessly about her drawings. The way he added an extra dash of cinnamon to the desserts, just because it made Lily giggle. The way he spoke to his daughter with patience, never brushing her off, even when the bistro got busy. It unsettled Claire at first. Her world was one of skyscrapers, deadlines, and calculated decisions. She was used to people rushing around her, trying to impress or gain her favor. But here, no one cared about her name or her wealth. And Ethan, he didn't look at her the way men usually did, with recognition of her power or calculations of what they might gain. He just looked at her like she was another mother trying to get through the day. One evening, after the dinner rush had slowed, Ethan approached her table carrying a steaming bowl. The dish was simple, soft pasta tossed in a sauce so fragrant it made her close her eyes before tasting it. He placed it before her with a small smile. "This one's personal," he said, his voice a little quieter than usual. "It's my mother's recipe. She used to make it whenever things got too heavy. Said it reminded her that no matter how hard the world gets, there's still sweetness left in it." Claire hesitated, her spoon hovering above the bowl. Something in his words tugged at her. She finally took a bite, and the flavors unfolded, rich, layered, comforting. It wasn't just food, it was memory. Suddenly, she was no longer the billionaire CEO sitting in a small restaurant. She was a little girl again, sitting on a wooden stool in her mother's cramped kitchen, listening to her hum while stirring a pot. She remembered the warmth of those evenings, the feeling of being loved so completely and unconditionally. The memories rushed forward so quickly they overwhelmed her. Before she could stop herself, tears welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. She set the spoon down, her hands trembling slightly. Ethan didn't say anything. He didn't ask why she was crying or offer empty reassurances. Instead, he quietly placed a napkin within her reach and gave her a gentle nod, as if to say he understood without needing an explanation. That silence, so respectful, so steady, broke something inside her. She had been surrounded by people her whole life, assistants, lawyers, board members, investors. Yet in her loneliest moments, she had always felt unseen. But here, in this humble little bistro, she felt understood. Her daughter, now fed and drowsy, gurgled happily beside her. Lily, Ethan's little girl, slid into the seat across from her and proudly showed her a crayon drawing of a big house with flowers. "This is our dream home," Lily explained brightly. "Daddy says one day we'll have one with a garden." Claire laughed softly through her tears, touched by the child's innocence. Something inside her shifted, something she couldn't name but could feel deeply. This place, this man, this tiny family, they were unraveling the steel walls she had built around her heart. When she left that evening, her driver opened the car door as usual, but Claire lingered for a moment, glancing back at the glowing windows of the bistro. She wasn't sure why she came back every day, but she knew she would return again tomorrow. Because it wasn't just about food anymore. It was about the way she felt when she was here, like she was no longer a woman carrying the weight of the world, but simply a mother, simply human. By the end of the month, Claire was no longer just a visitor. Her baby, Emma, had become a regular fixture at the bistro, always gurgling happily in her stroller or in Claire's arms. And Claire herself had settled into the rhythm of the place in ways she hadn't expected. It was never intentional, at least, that's what she told herself. Yet somehow, the quiet hours of the afternoon found her there, sipping coffee while working on her laptop, her eyes occasionally drifting up to watch Ethan flip pans with practiced grace. Her phone still buzzed with calls from assistants, investors, and board members, but the bistro seemed to soften the edges of her sharp, relentless world. More than once, she caught herself staring at Ethan. Not because he was handsome, though he was in a grounded, unpolished way, but because of the way he carried himself. He moved with patience. He listened when people spoke. He smiled easily at his daughter and his customers, and there was no artifice in him. Her own life had been a fortress of control. Since inheriting her father's company, she had fought tooth and nail to prove herself. Billionaires weren't allowed to falter, especially not women. Vulnerability was a liability. But here, in this little corner of the city, she found herself laying that armor down without realizing it. One evening, the bistro had emptied out, leaving only the glow of pendant lights and the faint hum of traffic outside. Lily was sprawled on a chair, half asleep with her head resting on her coloring book, while Emma slumbered against Claire's chest in a baby carrier. Ethan was wiping down counters, humming softly under his breath. Claire lingered at her table long after she had finished her meal. She didn't want to leave. The thought of stepping back into her glass tower apartment, cold and silent except for the cries of her baby, felt unbearable compared to the warmth around her now. "Long day?" Ethan asked gently, his voice breaking the quiet. Claire let out a soft laugh. "They're all long days, but here, it doesn't feel so heavy." She paused, then glanced at him. "You make it look easy. Being a parent, running this place." Ethan shook his head with a wry smile. "It's not easy. I burn bread, I forget invoices, and Lily still thinks candy counts as dinner. But I try. That's all we can do, isn't it? Just try." The simplicity of his answer disarmed her. She looked down at her daughter's tiny face, relaxed in sleep, and whispered almost to herself, "I don't think I know how to just try. For me, it's always been, win or lose. No in between." He set aside the rag, leaning on the counter to meet her gaze. "Maybe you've been fighting the wrong battles, then." The words sank into her chest, deeper than she wanted to admit. Her throat tightened, and she quickly looked away, focusing on Emma's little hand curled against her suit. But Lily chose that moment to stir, rubbing her eyes before shuffling over to Claire. The little girl tugged gently on Claire's sleeve and asked in her sleepy voice, "Are you gonna be my new mommy?" The words hit like a thunderclap. Claire froze, her breath catching. She glanced at Ethan, wide-eyed, but he looked as startled as she did. "Lily," he started, but his daughter had already climbed into Claire's lap, curling against her as if she belonged there. Tears prickled Claire's eyes. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Emma shifted in her carrier, sighing contentedly, while Lily snuggled close, her tiny hand clutching Claire's blouse. In that moment, something cracked wide open inside her. She had built her life on skyscrapers, contracts, and iron willpower. But what she had really been craving, what her daughter had been craving, was right here. Not power, not wealth, family. She looked up at Ethan, and he was already watching her. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a quiet hope, fragile and real. Claire swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "I can buy anything in this world, Ethan. Planes, companies, whole buildings. But what you gave me," she glanced down at her daughter and then at Lily. "This. Peace, love, the feeling of belonging. I can't buy that. I didn't even know I needed it until you showed me." Ethan walked closer, his footsteps soft against the floor. He rested a hand gently on Lily's back, his eyes never leaving Claire's. "Maybe you don't have to buy it. Maybe you just hold on to it." For a long moment, the three of them sat in that quiet bistro, the air thick with the unspoken promise of something new. Outside, the city roared on, but inside, time seemed to slow, wrapping them in warmth. Claire realized then that this was what home could feel like. Not walls of glass, not the silence of penthouses, but laughter, messy tables, the smell of garlic and cinnamon, and the weight of two children curled safely in her arms. And in Ethan's steady gaze, she saw the possibility of a future she hadn't dared to imagine, one not built on wealth or power, but on something far rarer. Love.